Hello there and welcome. I'm Ole Brygger, and if you're new here, I really hope I'll earn your subscription today. This is the last video in the series of the cliff, cave and mine terrain. And I'm going to use the last of my awful EPS foam. It's also gonna get messy with some plaster. I still have this big piece, 60 by 120 centimeters. I will put it in inches and feet down here. I'll make two top parts to cover up the mountain up here. And hopefully I won't see plaster again for a very, very long time. So we better get started. I'll use the 20mm foam for the bases and cut them out in a size of 40 by 60 centimeters. There's a slight difference in the height of the front part of the cliff that we will have to fix. We also need an overhang so it will blend in with the front part. I will mark it up from the underside so it will follow the edges of the cliff and blend in a lot better. I'll use my handheld hot wire cutter to cut it along the edge. To give it a more natural look, I also cut out a couple of slopes. And I think it follows the lines okay. It doesn't have to be precise because it's nature and nature is a bit rough. We also need to elevate the base plate 8mm, that's about 1/3 of an inch. I went to my scrap pile of foam and found this foam from the army painter and cut out some 8mm strips that we can use to elevate this base. I used some hot glue to glue in the strips of foam all around the edge of what is going to be the bottom of the base. The height is set, the top piece is flush with the rest of the build. Now I just need to mark up where this piece will go and we can start building the rest of the terrain. I will use some hot glue to attach it to the base, lining it up to my marks and give it a light pressure. And we have an overhang that should fit the rest of the build. I will line up the two parts and make a small drawing where I want a path through a canyon to go. This is the only drawing I will do, just to make a path where I want my players to go. This might change, I don't know, but now I will start finding some of the pieces that I can reuse and just use up the rest of this awful EPS foam. I want this big piece of foam to go right here, but it overlaps the two bases, so we will have to do some cutting. I will mark it up so it will match the path I made before. I just use my handheld hot wire cutter because I want some kind of structure, but eventually everything will be covered in plaster. And now I'll just need to cut this part in two so it will match the size of the base. And for that I'll actually use my proxon. I had my proxon standing on the floor so it was out of the video frame. But now it's cut. And I can glue it in with some hot glue. And from here on I'll just find all the chunks and pieces of foam that I have, especially all the EPS foam. But I didn't have enough of that EPS foam. Lucky enough, I had my stockpile of cutoffs, of the good foam actually. I might as well make a good dent into that pile of cutoffs and use some of it for this project. This part of the build is just building some structure and make something that will look like a mountain, like a rough sketch up before we start to make all the details. And it is just cutting and gluing and cutting some more and gluing some more. I'll just build up and use all tiny little parts of the leftover scrap foam. And now to something that will give it some more details. This is the leftover bark I brought home from Norway, and this will give it very nice cliff texture when I glue it in here. I'll just put in the pieces where I see they fit best, and then I'll use some hot glue to attach them. I still have some leftover pieces of foam that I will use to fill in and build up around all the bark. This maybe look a bit sloppy and rough, But now we are going to get messy and mix up the first batch of plaster. And for those who know me, you know I hate working with plaster. It is messy and this plaster specifically dries up too fast for me. It's very hard to control, so I have to make a lot of smaller batches. I only managed to do plaster on one of the parts and I left it overnight. And now I actually found out that I only have enough plaster left for one more little batch. And I refuse to go out and buy more plaster because I hate it so much and I will never work with it again if I can. So I had to think, well, I have a bucket of drywall filler in my workshop and I think I will go get it. It will take about 24 hours for it to dry, but I can live with that if it can cover up this last piece that I have built. I think this bucket have been in my workshop for maybe 6 or 7 years. It is a bit thick and dried out some places, but I think I can manage to use it anyway. It's easier to work with. The only thing is, the dry time is a bit of a challenge for my patience for things to dry. Maybe I can live with it and avoid working with plaster in the future. This is definitely a way I will go if I have something I'll need to build like this. And finally, I will use the last plaster I have in my house. This will be used for filling in some gaps and make some texture so it will match the other part of this build. Now I'll just have to let it set overnight. It's the next day and this is hard as rock. There is a lot of loose gravel all around it and I will start to clean up everything using my vacuum cleaner. Because when I start to use the Mod Podge, I don't want anything of this stuff to go into my brush. I also want to clean my desk, and I actually forgot to mention that I have bought this silicone baking mat. Usually I build my stuff on top of my cutting mat, but it's very hard to clean when I get all sorts of stuff on it. None of the products I use will bind on silicone. Either paint, glue and other textures and stuff that I use in my projects, it won't stick. And I can just clean it up with some water or isopropyl alcohol and use it for the next project. And it's Mod Podge time. I have mixed this Mod Podge 50-50 with black paint and some water. And now I'll just apply it with a brush all over this terrain piece to bind everything together and fill in the gaps, and if there is some loose material, it will just stay where it's supposed to be. I spent about an hour filling in all the gaps and making sure there was Mod Podge all over these two pieces of terrain. Now we just have to wait for it to dry. I have headed out to my workshop to prime these two pieces with some color. I'll use some wilderness woodland, ruins and cliffs, and dungeon and subterrane. This is a foam safe spray. It means that it don't melt foam. Now I have used plaster and drywall filler. It doesn't matter that much. However, I will also paint the sides and they are not covered with either plaster or drywall filler. I will use the dungeon and subterrane and spray it from the top. This is a brownish green color and it will make a good foundation for where it's going to be dirty. And then I'll use the ruins and cliffs and spray on the side where there is actually visual cliffs. This is a bluish gray and it will work perfectly for the base of the cliffs. I'll also spray all the sides just to make them a bit more darker than the white foam. And finally, I will use the wilderness and woodland to give it a tint of green here and there where I'm going to put in some basing material, like static grass, bushes and other green stuff. It will probably be painted over with some other colors, but still it will give me an idea of where the different colors will go. And now it's time to give it some paint. I've chosen these colors from the Game Master's Dungeons and Caverns core set, and these colors are from the old Army Painter war paints. Some of them have equivalents to the new Fanatic range, but some of them actually don't. I have used some pan pastels before, but this time I think I'll just use these 5 colors. The brown colors will go on all the flat and horizontal surfaces, and the cliffs, which are vertical, I will use the gray tones. I'll use a huge makeup brush and start with the darkest colors and work my way up to the lightest. Working with large terrain pieces like this, dry brushing is definitely the way to go. It's quick and fast, and the result, it just speaks for itself. It just looks good. These 2 pieces took me about 1.5 hours to get done. On some of the cliff parts where I used the bark, I will use this dark tone wash. This will just enhance the shadow areas and make them pop a bit more. I brought in the mine entrance part of this build. This was the first one in this series. This is to blend in the colors and make the correct transition from the old build to this new build on the top. And this actually turned out pretty good. Now we just need the flocking. I will use only 2 things. I will use this battlefield grass and my lemon tea leaves. In the first part, I actually also used some static grass and made everything more complicated. This time it will only be the 2 types of flocking, some tufts and other minor details. To make sure there's a good transition between the old build and the new, I kept the mine entrance build on the table in this startup phase with the flocking. After I have applied some glue, I will start out using some of the lemon tea leaves. These are a bit darker, and then I will just sprinkle a tiny bit of the battlefield grass on top just to give some brighter green colors. To give it some variation, I will use these 2 types of tufts. These are from the army painter, and one is mountain tuft, and then I have the highland tuft. And then we just need to work our way up the mountain, putting on some glue, more flocking, and then some tufts to give everything a good coverage. Last summer I was in Norway and I brought home some of this reindeer moss. I have used it before and I will use it again here on top of the mountain. There was a tiny edge that didn't line up perfectly in the cliff, and I'll just hide my crimes with this weed from Green Stuff World. To make sure the flocking will stay where I put it, I'll use this fixer agent from Crowd Cover. To bring in some more vibrancy, I have these flower tufts. I will just put them strategically in some spots where there might be a quest waiting for my players. 6 months ago, I started this project with the cliffs, cave and mines. And it turned out 6 parts before I was done. This is actually the most cheap project of this size I have ever built. I used the awful EPS foam, which is dirty cheap, but it's almost impossible to work with. You can't put textures into it. You have to cover it with some kind of texture paint. Or the thing I hate the most, plaster. I really hate that stuff. But I love the texture that I can do with it. But I think in the future I will go with that drywall filler. Then I just have to learn to manage my patience. I think that will be a better solution for me if I have to do something similar later. And the build is done. I really love each and every little detail that I put into this. And I think we should have a look on how this will turn out in a playable scenario. Our heroes have arrived at the entrance to the lost mine of Eastering Mountains. It is early in the morning and the sun is starting to rise, and the morning mist is still flowing from the mountain. before they can enter the mine, they will have to find their long-lost friend, Old Seeker Manhoff, who is the only one to know what to find in the mines. The hero spots some goblins scattered on the top of the ridge of the mountain. They will have the advantage if they sneak up the mountain hidden by the mist and make a surprise attack. And the goblins are surprised by the attack, and the heroes takes down each and every goblin with ease. They work their way further up the mountain, and then they hear a grunt, and out of the shadows they see a huge mountain troll. Swiftly, the heroes regroup and storm the mountain troll with all their power. It is a feisty fight, but in the end, they manage to succeed, and the troll is dead. The heroes continue their search for Seeker, and finally they arrive to a small ridge where they see the person they know appear from the mist of the mountain. Now they can get the knowledge they need to explore the mines of Eastering and continue their search for artifacts and treasures in the depths of the unknown. Thank you so much for watching this to the end. I really appreciate you all being here, and if you think I've earned it, please hit that subscribe button, push the like, and maybe leave a comment below if there is something you want to tell me about all this, and maybe your own projects. Have you tried working with EPS foam and plaster? I would really love to know what you think about that. This is it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.